it's time for our second panel discussion, Artificial Intelligence and Arts, Harnessing the Intersection of Creativity and Innovation. Please join me in welcoming Director Arts in India, British Council, Ruchira Das, Independent Legal Counsel and founder of International Legal Alliance, Mr. Jamshed Mistry, music composer, producer, co-founder, True School of Music, Ashutosh Pathak, founder, director, Tifa Studios, Trishla Talera, and the moderator for this discussion, founder, Method Gallery, Sahil Arora.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mic's on. Ashu?
Good afternoon. Lovely to be here.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Asad, for putting this panel together. When we think about AI in the world today, and I think everyone on this panel does think a lot of how it intersects with the arts, I think there's just so many directions we can think about, right? Just to get the afternoon started, I always like to get a sense of where the audience is when it comes to new technology. And Asad's always putting me on a panel for new technologies, right? NFTs, let's call Sahil. Metaverse, let's call Sahil. And here we are with AI. So I have a few questions and quick show of hands. How many of you know what AI is or what it stands for, right? Pretty much everybody. You can keep your hands up. Slowly we'll get to no one, right? So whoever knows AI, hands up real quick. Okay, most people. How many of you all use AI on a daily basis? How many of you all have used AI to research something? How many of you all have used AI to generate an image? How many of you all have used AI to generate a video? Okay, a few hands. How many of you all have used AI to generate music? How many of you all have an AI friend? No, I'm serious. It's a serious question. How many of you have a chatbot that you all chat with like you would get on WhatsApp with a few people? Not many, right? And it's something I've thought a lot about, which is what is the emotional quotient of AI, right? What's the emotional connection that you can have with a technology? And it's a conversation I have with a lot of artists when we are actually discussing this subject, right? When you talk about art and what it is, it's essentially an emotional response to the world around us, and from the audience perspective, it is how we emotionally respond to the work that someone has created, right? And with a lot of technology, I mean, there's always hype, there's always buzz, like, oh, NFTs are the next big thing, the metaverse is where we're going to exist, the Matrix is becoming reality, and today we are at AI, right? It's been there for a few years, but I want to kind of open with that, right? Guys, do you think AI is just hype like all these other technologies? Or is it part of the cycle, or is it really here? And how do you all think the long-term acceptance, adoption, or eventuality of AI is going to be? Let's kind of get started with that. Ashu?
Okay. Well, there's a lot to unpack in what you just asked right now, right? So I think AI obviously is here to stay. There's no question about that. I think how we embrace it and what we do with it is what's important. I think the main question to think about is the humanity factor, about what does it mean to be human in today's day and age, and how are we incorporating these technologies within our own human experience and our expression. I think currently there are some immediate threats that some people may perceive through AI. And there are a lot of advantages right now in the creative space with using some AI tools. So we can get deeper into that, and I think education is really an important space for us to incorporate to understand what that is, what AI is, and how to incorporate it within our own creative process, as well as how to defend yourself against a potential threat. So both sides, but I can get deeper into that conversation a little later.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything you said, and I think we are at a very interesting stage because it's been there for a while, but not long enough to have already embedded into our lives without us having worked around it to develop policies, frameworks, safeguarding, and really, I think it is here to stay. That it doesn't, you can't really bury your head in the sand and say it's not there and we can do without it. So then, if it is here to stay, and if we are going to have it in our lives, and how do we embrace it? How do we make sure that it is, like you said, we have the human element, embedded in it? How do we create awareness so that we can actually use it to our advantage? We can actually use it to help us do what we do better, and also not, become exploitative in some way. I think any system can become dangerous or exploitative to some extent because of the people who use it. It is really that, which is why I think conversations like this are so important, and I think policy framework around these technologies is so important, so we don't let it, just go loose and all right.
So I will agree, and I will add a layer to that. I think there was a similar resistance when people were starting of the early days of the internet. It's like, if the internet has all the information, what will we do? And we can do so much more now since we have this basis covered. And I think that's what becomes very interesting with AI, is what is then the human capacity, and what can we imagine using this tool. And I would encourage you to, at this point, maybe think of this tool 30, 50 years in as how we're using the internet today. Can we imagine not using the internet? So it's another tool that is now accessible to us. What can we rig using this, yet being very cautious that we're feeding this monster? So I think it's this duality of any portal, whether it was the radio, TV, internet, or this. So it's to have this criticality within this medium and within this tool, and continue to create policy, rules, frameworks that then can be monitored over use and accessibility of these portals to a wider community.
Well, the only AI that we used to know was when you boarded a flight and it said AI, flight AI so-and-so. Things have rapidly changed, my goodness. I mean, I think we should be now having a next discussion on after AI what, because I think it's already, that's the amazing thing, and I keep asking, because especially as a lawyer in this space, that why is law and technology not running together? Technology is way, 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 way ahead, and then the law tries to catch up. And I think that's a serious issue that needs to be discussed, debated, and actually, brought all together. So getting a policy in, I think, and discussing it. And this is an international issue. This has nothing to do with India. We're global, and we're just a part and player. But right down to the common man, I think it's playing a huge I'll give you just one fine example. Today you have live streaming of cases from the Supreme Court right down. Okay, and we had appeared to say that why not transcripts, so legal transcripts. Okay, we actually gave the Supreme Court E-Committee an example by using an Otter AI app, free app, and we did for and against, and said this can about 85% accuracy. If it's a paid version, you'll get 95%. What does it mean? You get transparency, you get everything in so cheap. So yes, I think we'll be very happy to discuss this and everything else, but especially in the world of art, culture, I think it's going to play it is already playing a very important role.
So Ruchira brought up policy as well, and Jamshed, obviously you spoke a little bit about it. But to stay on that subject, I mean, for a technology that's evolving so rapidly and being adopted equally rapidly, where does the framework and the policy stand right now? And in what way is it shaping up? Not just from the consumption and use of it, but also, let's say, from an artist perspective, the creator side. And one example I want to give that I know a lot of, at least creators, are bothered about is how AI tools stake some claim on the creation of the work through that. So if you use Adobe, a lot of graphic designers, if you'll know anyone, are extremely upset with Adobe's new policies of them owning anything that's created in fine print, in very fine print, right? That's kind of like saying, hey, if you used a pencil, the creator of the pencil owns it, which like Jamshed, maybe from a legal macro perspective, how are policymakers looking at that? Because right now AI is controlled by private sector, right?
So, okay, so I think the few acts that we have, and we are now in an Indian situation. See, again, as I said initially, the problem is your law is just not keeping up with this technology. So you have, the intellectual property, you have copyright. The first question is, if I'm a creator, the first owner of the copyright is the creator himself. So what happens to AI? So this question of, is it the AI or is it the person who actually goes and creates the AI? Is he the owner and things like that? The world, from Hollywood right down, they're all, the courts are still grappling with this situation. As of now, if I can say so, till this minute, yes, it is still the creative person's prerogative. How will it change? It just might change. You need a couple of judgments the other way around in favor of companies, and things might go. And that's the beauty about law. You have three decisions one way or the other. But I think that's where it is at. So as of now, it is in favor of the creative person, the person behind, the human behind the AI. That is where it is at today.
You mean the person giving the prompt?
Well, maybe.
There also is
even the person who's sort of who's sort of developed the program. That's also a way. I remember once arguing a case on patents. Whether a mathematical algorithm is patentable or not. And luckily we got the person who is the Chief Justice of India now, who understood the case, and we finally said yes. So it did belong. So I think it's important, and we will see change. But instead of depending upon a court of law to decide these questions, let it come in through policy. Let it come in through, get all the stakeholders together, say this is what we have, and this is how it should be. And I think, somebody spoke about the artist and the folk singers and things like that. Yeah, that's important. At the end of the day, they're the persons who should, get. We'll get into those aspects also during the conversation.
Yeah, I think also an important part is just the data sets used by AI models, right? So there's someone who's created a photograph that's being used as the base. And Ashu, I kind of want to segue into the music side with that a little bit, because sampling has been a thing for a really long time, where you cut up a record, slice it, dice it, put something together, and usually at time of release you go and get permissions, rights. When it comes to AI in the music industry, the tools are essentially using all the sounds that are out there without any kind of credit, right? And it even applies to the visual arts. So in the music industry specifically, like, how are people looking at their previous recordings being used and obviously new outputs being created using AI tools and technologies?
Yeah. So if you look at it from the point of view of someone who's working in the music industry, right? So if my job is to be a singer or a sessions player, or right now the issue is that I'm being replaced, because even if my own voice is being used now to redo my own voice later on, So the real threat there is that anyone, I don't need to hire a sessions player anymore. I can just go quickly get something done, and it'll be sampled in there. I can get Freddie Mercury's voice right now if I want, no problem. All that thing can be done. If I'm a music producer, a client doesn't have to come to me anymore, because they can just say, okay, I just put my prompt in and I get my music track done. Companies like Udio and Suno, they're getting sued for this whole thing. That's happening. If I am a songwriter, lyric writer, I can just chat GPT it and we can get it done, right? And if I'm a sound engineer, there are mastering tools, there are sound engineering tools that can be done. What people are recognizing is that eventually there is a certain generic output that is right now coming out because the training sets are kind of becoming similar and everything's happening similar. So that's kind of a trend that's also scary that's happening within the music industry, where if you look at the kind of music that you listen to on Spotify, right? So Spotify is turning into they're trying to make you passive listeners more than active listeners, because you probably don't know half the songs that you've heard, who they are by and what they are by. You know, there's an interesting story. There's a Swedish guy called Johan Rohr. Check this out. This guy has got 15 billion streams on Spotify. No one's ever heard of him because he's got 656 different aliases. And he lives in Sweden. And the music, and most of his music is on all the playlists that are out there. So what's going on over there, right? So who owns the copyright for that? So obviously Spotify, I'm not saying this, but obviously there's something happening at the back over there. Now what AI is going to do to this whole thing is going to accelerate this whole process. Right now there's one guy doing thousands of tracks, and he's doing these 60-second, 70-second tracks. This is all from a passive listening point of view. So that's where a lot of the fear is coming in from, where, first of all, the audience itself is becoming passive, and the content is becoming generic. But I think there's a flip side to this and a really good side to this, because at one point of time this is gonna tank, right? So what people do need to do right now is to really focus on themselves and the individuality. See, music is, and all art form it's a form of expression. It's from an artist to a creator, and it's an interactive situation. So the problem with AI is that does it have the understanding of the human condition and the nuances? So I think more and more people now are understanding this, and the way to move forward is actually to skill up, to really skill up, because right now an average Joe can sound professional because they can just put in prompts and do that. But I think that's also a fun way to get someone in. I think as an entry point is superb. It's for us who want to create more and more musicians, fine, if I can get you in through the AI, the avenue, but you have to come in and actually learn the fundamentals of music. So that's where I think it's going, and that's where it should go. I think, and if we look at policies and what need to be created, we feel the re-education and the education of the fundamentals of creativity and art and everything that you do need to know, the basics. The basics are being taken care of by AI. But that means that you have a very limited amount of knowledge beyond what AI is generating. So what are you as a human being going to contribute to it? So I think it's really important for us to figure out how to make sure everyone recognizes the education of the human being in this whole situation.
Trishla, on the arts front, right? I think it's been a very long debate, not on AI, I'll get to that, but even on digital art in general, right? There's been some barrier, some resistance, and now we have this entire new AI, either as a tool or AI-generated art. How is the visual arts world looking at this? And what Ashu said in terms of an easy entry point without having traditional skills, but to be able to express yourself. Are you seeing more artists explore that, or just your non-trained, non-skilled artists looking to enter through those channels?
So yes, it has acted as a great entry point. It comes with its own nuances, where now some amount of policy is starting to come into play, where a gallery recently said that we will not accept any AI works. If it is created on any platform, we will not accept it. And that was quite a strong stance, because this is known as a gallery that does showcase very new age work. They said you can use it to submit your study. You can submit your proposal using AI, but that cannot be the outcome. And there's a paper by Gene Kogan that talks about what is now artificial creativity. Things that intelligence needs certain kind of programming, needs pattern recognition. And creativity is a complete paradox of that. Because creativity talks about breaking systems, innovation, right? Which requires a little bit of tearing apart. How do you train the system to then tear apart different contextual systems, which is when it really starts to fall apart. So we did this exercise with some of our creatives, and we don't say artists, because I think that word starts to fall flat after a point, because they're creative thinkers. And I think there was a lot of hands raised when said who's used the visual tools in AI. You know that the aesthetics of these visual tools are very predictable. Do you want an impressionist thing? So the movements are then deciding the visual aesthetic of what is coming out. So as an individual artist, if you know you have a unique aesthetic, then that's when the human side starts to appear. And that goes into some controversy as to, will I then have ownership over my own aesthetic? And that's going to become things that we'll further have to see, and maybe Jamshed can recommend what kind of policy will be required of creators' rights. But at this point, it's still in that lucid stage, is that if I'm creating my work on these platforms, can you also feed these platforms? So if you, as much as we're looking at the new age, if you look at local, we just saw a beautiful Lavani performance. If you look at the aesthetic of Lavani on AI, you'll probably not be able to go very far to get what you're looking for, because there's just not that much vocabulary on the internet, because it's feeding off the data set on the internet. Similar to Wikipedia when it first started, it asked the citizens to contribute. So can you start building data sets, especially in India, in areas where it's not identifiable at this point? And can we build our cultural heritage from that side? I think those will be interesting formats to look
I have a
further
question.
in.
For the gallery that said no AI, where do they draw that line? Like, how do you know when you use it for study and when it's actually...
So as I said, if you
I
start
mean, if
seeing
I've
enough
used
AI,
a software that has got some AI engineering in it, I
if
can't
you
use...
see enough of the language of what
Okay.
the AI is producing, you over time can
You
start
can
to
tell,
tell.
okay.
So generative works, generative
Generative.
art, aside from AI, because those are two very different things, and let me establish that, does have it. So they can ask you to submit your back-end study, like in school you asked for an equation of how you got to the answer. So share your working. So give us the algorithm you used to create this, and if you're not able to submit that, then it's not original work.
Got it.
So, but that goes into a deeper question of how do we look at this word original? And as a institution who did a meme exhibition, I think it's really interesting to see, okay, what do we also in this day and age call original? And the controversy between democratic and then original. I'll stop there because it's not right or wrong, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, I think, Ashu, just to come back to your question, I think where things will get really interesting is when AI and other technologies start to converge. So AI and, let's say, the metaverse, the more time we spend with our Apple Vision Pros or Google Glasses, which may inevitably happen, I think that's where the lines will start to get really wonky.
I
and
think
blurry.
one of the most exciting things is entertainment will always be entertainment, or art will always be art. It's the distribution forms and it's the way you express it. So what are the most exciting part about AI in what we do in Musically? I mean, the performance aspect of it, and how amazingly you can think beyond the limitations that you have right now. So that to me is got a very positive angle. And also the so-called menial tasks of doing things. If you can, because if that's sometimes a big problem for a lot of people, they don't want to go through the programming of something. You know, if something can be done for them, then they wait.
I know coders who get their code on AI. So, yeah. But you know, I think just because it's now progressing so fast and things are changing, like it is getting better, right? That standard aesthetic is starting to get a little more nuanced, right? And I think Ruchira, the British Council, I think has been working on a report that's been studying a little bit of how it's been developing, how artists, technologists across the board have been using it, and potentially how that could feed into policy and framework development. Like, what's the report really covering, and what's it, you know, like, tell us a little bit about the process you all undertook to just study this as well.
Thanks. Yes. So earlier this year, we worked with Unbox Cultural Futures Society, an organization based in India, and through desk research and conversation with several artists from across India, we tried to understand the landscape, because I think that's really important before we start getting into policy framing or those conversations, or even understanding, you know, British Council, looking at what can we bring from the UK, or where is the sweet spot for collaboration between artists in India and UK. It's important to understand the landscape, and I think that was what we attempted to do. And the report will be out next month, September, and we'd love to share it with all of you, but maybe because I'm here, I'll take the opportunity to you know, share some highlights. and like I said, these were through desk research and conversations with about 31 participants who worked with tech in various ways, in small ways, really embedded in it, or using it as a tool. And I think that is, again, I think a couple of you touched on that. That's also very important to understand the vocabulary, to understand the definition. What do we mean when we say AI? Is it just, especially when it comes to art making? And I think those will need to be unpacked before we can, start building frameworks around it. So some of the interesting, highlights from the report are that, and we did focus on speaking to artists who work in smaller spaces as well, because often those are the voices that don't get heard when such conversations or reports are being sort of drafted. So self-organized communities, studios, enterprises, cultural practitioners, these were sort of the people that we spoke to for this report. And what is really exciting is that because this is nascent even internationally, that these conversations are beginning to happen, I think there's a real chance to insert ourselves there. I think this is not something from the report, but from another report paper that I was reading, while these conversations of policy framework around AI are happening across sectors, the artist's impact is not always taken into consideration, because I think that we mentioned in another panel, commerce often is a driver for a lot of these. And if we can sort of make sure that there's a room for us, I think there will be a much better and equitable, hopefully, policy framework that we come up with. Some of the things that came up in our report were that much has been, I'm sorry, I'm reading out of it because it is a report and I don't want to miss things. Indian artists are pushing back against the Western bias, and they are trying to develop technologies that more accurately express Indian culture, context, and priorities. So that's, again, something that's possible because it's a new and emerging space where you can then say that, okay, I'm not going to necessarily go with this predefined, definition, predefined way of working or looking at AI, but I will find my ways of engaging with it. Artists engaging with technology in their practice are also in a unique position to offer critical perspectives on its role in society. For example, artistic interrogation on the legal and policy infrastructures associated with technological development have the power not just to instigate critical conversations, but also to propose infrastructural solutions. I think that's why having an artist or having creatives in the room would be very important. Digital tools, of course, talking about audience engagement, which you also mentioned, digital tools empower broader cultural expression and participation from diverse practitioners and audiences, not typically engaging with established arts and culture institutions. And lots of, I think, even the bigger institutions like Museum of Art and Photography Bangalore, Science Gallery Bangalore are actively using technology to make it more accessible for audiences which engage with, especially younger audiences or audiences who may not typically have been coming into those spaces. Alongside expanding access to art, the decentralized arts and technology ecosystem is providing a platform for artists from historically marginalized groups. Arts organization in New Delhi, Khoj, for example, hosted an international residency which focused on the intersection of gender alongside urbanism, ecology, and technology. So these kind of interesting, like you said as well, intersection of other sectors is again happening a lot in the art space, and to take that into account and to try and understand what sort of solutions or what definitions they're coming up with would be very important to make note. Arts engaging with technologies also have the power to create empathy in audiences. Interactive, immersive experiences can go beyond visual and auditory engagement, tapping into the full, sensory experience. So these were just a few things. Of course, we will come upon, what more needs to be done and what are the kind of support that the sector is looking at, but that's for later.
Yeah, I think I'm really looking forward to the report coming out. Jamshed, I mean, you've obviously worked in the media and entertainment industry in India and internationally with several production houses. are there parallels to what the VC report from visual arts, like is it similar when it comes to that larger M&E space as well? Like are Indian creators feeling more empowered but at the same time more protective of their regional legacy and heritage, and how are they looking to protect that with the advent of AI?
So, the interesting, let's go very basic. For example, our Copyrights Act today in India is absolutely amazing. Some of our US colleagues, although technically people have preferred to sort of register it, worldwide, etc. But just the fact that you have, conventions and treaties which actually allow, your copyright registration in India to have, relevance internationally. I think that is something that now is sort of getting more and more awareness. And that is something that we want to, saying that you can do something in India which you don't have to necessarily go to, you can do a WIPO registration and you'll get, international coverage for everything. Similarly, a copyright registration. I'm going very basic to over here. So I think we'll see more and more of that. We're also getting, I'm very happy to say, some of our judges are getting, more tech savvy. They're getting more, understanding to the subject. We're trying to bring this in at least as a, starting with a guest lecture to other things in every single law school now. I think the next generation, which is tech savvy, not, in the Chief Justice's court in New Delhi is paperless. You can't bring in a scrap of paper. I think that's fantastic. We're going the right way, but he'll retire and then what will happen, God knows. You touched upon metaverse. I think, let me touch upon that. Very interesting. In fact, during the pandemic, somebody actually showed me an entire courtroom in metaverse. I think I absolutely see that happening at some stage. We'll just have to, but again, let's not, so the use of technology is it's for all of us to see. The protection must be, must go hand in hand. I think that's extremely important. So as much as you, want to create, reports, you want to engage, and India, as somebody very rightly said, is a cosmos of cultural heritage and art. We should be, in fact, as she beautifully said, we must be leaders in this. Why should we allow others to take the lead? We should be out there saying this is what is required and this must be done. And I think, we have the bandwidth, and let's use platforms such as this to actually reach out to friends. And believe you me, now people are listening. So I think that's the difference that I've seen.
Yeah, I think when certain things happen in the mainstream, or let's say pop culture at a large level, they trigger more conversation around it. They trigger quicker policy, maybe legal framework around it. And a recent example, I don't know how many young people here are there, but did anyone follow the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef that happened? Right? Two hip-hop giants. One is a Pulitzer Prize winner, the other is just the biggest musician in the world right now. They were having some argument. It went to their music, and Drake actually made an entire track produced using AI, and he used the voice of Tupac, right, who is a dead rapper. But Drake wrote the words and got AI to rap it in Tupac's voice against Kendrick Lamar. And the Tupac estate then actually sued Drake's label and Drake, and the track was taken off all platforms, right? But it's an example of the mainstream bringing the need for policy on something like that, because it didn't exist until that happens. Jamshed, like from a legal perspective, how does that work? Can you just use someone else's voice, put it out there, and especially to like badmouth someone, like to slander someone? And Ashu, I think from your perspective, that happened recently as well, right? The Taylor Swift support, I think. And Ashu, as a musician, there has to be some ethical conversation about this as well, right? Like, where do you draw the line as a creator with the tools at your disposal? So I guess this is kind of like legal and then the ethical creator side of it.
So first and foremost, I need to thank my daughter because she's the one who told me, Dad, have you heard so-and-so, so-and-so? I said, absolutely not. What's it all about? So I heard it, and I mean, your first reaction is it's absolutely ridiculous. How can you do things like that? But then, the fact that it was played publicly and things like that. So of course, I mean, see, it's very simple. You have the laws in place, at least as far as slander, defamation, this, that. Now, for example, what is defamation? When you come down in the eyes of another, and that. So can they be sued? Of course they can be sued. And I mean, the US is an amazing place. You can sue anybody for anything. So that's what it is. But again, and you can, interestingly, this is the other great thing about, this, you can sue anybody from any other place. I mean, if I listen to something here, I can sue from here. So that's the internationalization of all this. But yes, of course, I mean, there is a need, and I mean, morality, sensitivity, bringing someone's reputation down, and especially, I mean, if it's a person who's no more, I mean, sure. But I think these are all extremely important case studies of what can go wrong. And, and yes, and the best part, somebody in between has made money out of this. Yeah. What about that? So,
YouTube.
So you see, this is what it is, and I think people need to be very, very responsible here. I mean, I know of a particular case of, I mean, just 30 seconds more, of an independent filmmaker who's suddenly, without knowing, in an audience like this, he showed his sort of film for the first time. Before you can say Jack or Mark Robinson, his thing was taken, and we found that the URL reached Queensland in a matter of seconds. Okay, so when we went to court and asked for a John Doe order, the judge said that's impossible. We said no, it's possible. This is what has happened. And then again, to get Google and Google India and YouTube, and finally we got it stopped. And so there is certainly a commercial aspect, and somebody is making money out of the wrong that is happening, where it should go to the creator, the person, and the creator is usually a person who doesn't have the bandwidth to actually take these things to court. And I think that also needs to change. We must have small claims tribunals, etc. We'll come to that.
I think we need to look at this from three possible angles. Okay, one is the creator, one is the audience, and one is the actual platform with which you hear these things. What he's talking about, the guys who actually make the money out of a lot of these things. As a creator, if I'm going to come up with something that I'm going to use this guy's voice to do, okay, it might work as a marketing tool to get myself out there, but at the end of the day, is that audience going to want to keep listening to me using someone else? As a creator, I have to make a decision. If I'm the cover artist creator and this is what I want to do and it's my thing, yeah, hell, as a creator I can do that. Now, as an audience, what do I want to listen to, right? Do I want to listen to Tupac doing Kendrick's thing, right? Drake's thing. Drake's thing, is that my idea of that? Now, I don't know what to say about that, but I don't know where the audiences are going to go in that. My gut is telling me that it's a novelty thing. It's going to last for a little bit. The scary part about this is the in-between guys, where, again, going back to what I was talking about, what I feel maybe Spotify and these kind of companies are trying to do. They're trying to use the game, the system that they've got already going, by making these things happen, because these lawsuits will happen between these two and these two, but in the middle, these guys are going to start making all the money. That's where I think the main problem lies. So we need to figure out how to solve that. And I think that's where what you're coming into really, I mean, this is a great opportunity actually. It's a great opportunity to figure out something in this space. I default back to the human thing every time. You know, at the end of the day, these are gimmicks that's going to go on, and I don't know how much. I don't even know if I want to hear Freddie Mercury's voice doing someone else doing a Queen cover or a new Queen original with Freddie Mercury's voice. I don't know. That's not really interesting to me anymore. And also the biggest thing is that we don't know formulas, right? Throughout history, can anyone predict what's going to happen next and what's going to be the next success? So the minute it becomes a formulaic situation, it starts getting plateaued. So that's where.
So if I could add a fourth segment, which is possibly community, or the institution, the collective, the group of the individuals, creators working together. And yes, in some regard, they could also be looked at as the middlemen who make the money, but I think there is a sense of accountability within the smaller forum, which becomes blurry as the institutions get larger. In the visual art space, there's estate management of the larger artists, especially after they die. What happens to estate management or copyright management of the smaller, the more independent artists, which could be in the audio scene as the label? So every sector within the arts will have some kind of middle institution that will monitor this. And that monitoring also creates a sense of archive, of accountability within who the creator is and the linking back to that creator. And this is where these, which is what the blockchain is kind of trying to do, but might be very, very complex if we try and do each original work or each artwork as a blockchain format. But what is then frameworks maybe we can look at, or peer validation in a sense, of these institutional, which has been done for a long time, but how do we take these formats into a more AI-backed platform without the heaviness of blockchain?
That
Open-ended
community
question.
angle really actually is a good point, because that's where the small artists and all that you were talking about, right? Like who represents them in this situation?
And can they represent themselves?
So if I may, I mean, I was just reminded of a paper that was brought out at the Salzburg Global Forum. It's a beautiful forum which I had the privilege of attending one year, which brings together artists, practitioners, academicians, policymakers, all in the same room, where they examine various points of urgency. And a couple of months back, there was one on AI and ethical futures. And Hannah Andrews, our Global Director, Innovation Technologies at British Council, attended that. And I won't go into that. I'll share the link for the paper. They have come up with a paper which says the Salzburg Statement on Artists Shaping Ethical AI Futures. I think it's really wonderful when you have this mixed group coming together from 25 countries, really looking at this phenomena that is affecting all of us. And they, just like we've been talking about the different sets, I think they've also mentioned the different ones. So I just wanted to take a minute to sort of read. I'm not going to go into the whole call to action, but the first one is to all people. To all people, to do no harm, prioritize human and living systems safely, well-being and fairness in the development of usage of AI. I think that's so critical. We keep coming back to that. Government and policymakers to develop regulations ensuring AI developments are inclusive and fair and amplify voices of systematically disadvantaged groups. Technology companies and developers to develop mechanisms to address bias and discrimination in existing and future AI systems. Artists, cultural producers, and cultural institutions to engage actively in policy discussions about AI to ensure that their perspectives are included. And NGOs and civil society to raise awareness through educational resources, presenting current issues related to AI and agency, trust, and attribution. There are many more, but I think they've also really talked about these, they're not talking about the money making. I think no one wants to go there, the commerce part of it. But I think if this policy is created and meant to be enforced, then, they will have to sort of toe the line, isn't it?
Yeah, I think And again, we have like a few people here who work across borders, right? And policy shapes up at different speed and different pace as well, right? Between India, UK, and let's say the States. And again, you can't deny industry control in Western countries of how it shapes up policy, right? And you look at the investments Google has made, Microsoft has made, Tesla has made. I don't know how idealistic policy may remain when you start factoring that in, but let's hope, let's kind of hope that happens. But on that subject, how are you all looking to address that cross-border policy, potentially even like not being uniform, right? Trishla, like for example, let's say if you're working with an artist in India who has used AI as a tool and it's okay over here, but there's a museum that maybe wants to present it, but they're not okay with it. How do you navigate those conversations of just different places having different policy and infrastructure around it? Or has that not happened yet?
Honestly, it's not happened yet in the technology and art space so much, because I don't think we have a policy for it to contradict a policy. And unfortunately, policy is still being dictated by the West. A little bit now from Japan, actually, becoming quite a strong player. They've set up an art and tech museum, which has been archiving new media practices in Japan for the last 4 decades. And when you compare that to India, which also has been using technology for that long, no museum will even remotely speak about collecting works that have any sort of, I would say, electrical aspect, forget any other layers of technology. And so we have a gap when we talk about the archive of the cultural production of the country. We have a big gap of where did these works go. We're still focusing on the traditional medium, and that's where our foundation, where we say Evolving Culture Foundation, starts to look at the more recent history and the documentation of these recent practices. And when we look back, it's like, it happened, but we don't have documentation. So that working will become a little missing. So I think these are questions that we now need to ask ourselves as a producing country with these new technologies. So where do we need to start maybe having institutions also being able to not only support the work, fund the work, but also start to document these practices? Preservation. Now you have work on a hard drive, you have work on the deep net. How is this work going to be available to even view what happened a few years in? Hard drives crash. The creators are also not working with the highest tech, they're working out of their homes. It's more of a community-led project or initiative-based project. It's not really funded. So how is this going to get preserved, I think, is the only question. We're going to lose this part of our young heritage. Ruchika, if you have any.
I agree, and I think boundaries are not the same when it comes to tech art, right? Just like you were saying that, the access is across, who's my audience? If I've created something in India, it's not necessarily the audience is sitting in India. They're going to Queensland as well. So I think this will need a new way of looking at policy. I don't know, you will be...
If I may, we tasted blood in the pandemic. So now we know what it's like to have global audiences. So now we want that, but are we willing to continue to make in those formats?
So I think again, I always come back to basics. I think what is the first and what is with you? And I think the gentleman earlier had spoken about contracts. He said, I think that's where it should all start from. I think you should get everything down into a contract. And I used to find it hilarious when they said, oh, when you're doing work internationally, how come this contract is not on stamp paper? So I said, excuse me, you don't need, the world doesn't follow that. So it's similar. So, even the type of contracts, we can have multiple jurisdictions, we can have all sorts of things. For example, the time for mediation and arbitration through these cultural modes is also a huge area that is waiting to develop. I think it must happen. In fact, they are talking about it, and I think the sooner the better. So every single aspect, wherever there's a dispute or difference between anyone, discuss it, resolve it, move on ahead. The final product is something, and I see this being enforceable. You don't have to wait for some courts for 20, 30 years. No, it should be done instantly. It can be done. And I think that's how, so the enforceability of contractual obligation. In fact, how about using technology the other way around to actually find out how much royalty is payable to an artist? I think you can use AI very happily. I think the music industry has actually done things like that. I think this needs sort of to be brought into all sorts of mainstream, whether you're an actor or an I mean, so this whole dialogue on NFTs also brought that into focus. So I think that is the way forward. Be practical and economical. That's the watchword.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes me think potentially of the contracts we as consumers and users sign with the platforms we interact with. So whether it's Spotify, YouTube, I mean, to pick up on what you said, I wish there was a feature where I could tell Spotify, don't play anything AI generated for me. And again, I think it's maybe something for even them to think about. And again, I think it ties into policy, right? Like, how do people want to consume the arts and not just content as well? Should we open up for audience questions? Does anyone have, I think we have quite a few.
I think today's discussion was very, very interesting and also an eye-opener. But I come back to the basics because, see, I think AI, just like any other technology that we have faced, I mean, I can go back to internet, to mobile, to smartphone, to so many things that have changed our life. But somewhere we've got a lot of apprehension against AI. I want to know, as lay people, as creative people, how can we use AI positively, and what are the no-go areas? Those are just as a sum up.
As of now, the creative process enhancement tools are the things that we really need to focus on right now, which is fantastic because there are things that it may take 20 hours for you to do, but you can do that with AI in 2 seconds. Those kind of things which kind of speed up the process of the creative process. I think those are the ones that are really important to do. The scary thing is to continue to do content without knowing your fundamentals. So what the problem right now is that if I know this much, but I sound pro with that means I think I'm pro. And that's what's happening right now in the industry. A lot of the kids right now are saying, hey, I don't need to study anything because I just need, I can do some DJing and now I know how to produce film scores, because all of a sudden that's what's happening there. So the big no-go, the big problem that people are not understanding is that you got to go back to the basics to understand your fundamentals of what you need to know your theory, music theory, to be able to speak the language of music. So from a musician's point of view, I can tell you that if you don't know your theory, you're going to only be able to speak 4 words. So if you want to speak infinite, if you want to express yourself infinitely, you need to have your foundation. Then the AI thing is a superb tool to accelerate that process. But you need to be mindful of that every time. Are you giving up your creative process to the tool? Or is the tool enhancing your own creative process? I think that's the equation one needs to keep in mind all the time. And then I think you're okay.
Yeah. Can I make a point? Yeah, so basically I'm a writer, I've got 4 books up, and now there's a trend to go to ChatGPT to get your content generated by AI. And honestly, I've just been a little wary of imposter syndrome because right now with pride, I say I've written 4 books. The next book, if it has infusions from AI, I'm going to suffer from imposter syndrome. And like you just said, you have to ask yourself constantly, is my creativity being enhanced or am I being now colonized by AI? And I think that's going to be a dangerous path to walk on for any creative person. Yeah. Even commercially speaking, Amazon, just to take your point forward, when you upload a book on Amazon now, it's asking you, is this AI generated? Does it have AI prompts or any connection to AI, whether it's your cover or your text? You have to declare it in all honesty, because I think if you're dishonest with Amazon, you just lose out on the whole platform. So it is getting to that point.
So I jokingly say with AI, you're only as good as your prompt. And how do we use this creativity? Find a way to give better prompts. And I think an answer to yours, to use this technology, just use it. And then to figure the good and the bad as a step further, just use it to understand how it's navigating, how is it responding. And across the tools, what we're starting to see is each tool or each platform has a style of its own, which is what the YouTubes or these galleries who are starting to monitor it are starting to recognize. If you're writing and sending me ChatGPT, it's using this kind of language which I can tell. So start to use it to understand how to be critical about it. And the other side that I would like to share is we're now starting to see regional languages starting to appear on these AI platforms. And how does that change the cycle of when these words don't exist in English? How do these prompts then react? When you start seeing Marathi, Tamil, especially for visual culture and visual prompts, what is this interaction? So I think it's too young to say what are the absolute do nots, but let's start to engage with it and come back with questions being like, okay, these are possibly do nots because it's reacting in this way. We still don't know what the reaction is.
Yeah, I'd also say I think we have to engage to build the data set as well. Because don't forget, AI doesn't have its own repository. So much of, work is probably not a part of the AI universe because, we are not using AI in those spaces. So I think if we start really using it intelligently and bringing it, feeding it with the right kind of information, we are also enhancing the output that is going to generate, for people who are going to use it.
So, again, starting with educational institutions, a lot of them now, especially teachers, the first thing they do is your assignment, they run it to see whether you... So that's one on the ground. Second very interesting thing is, as much as, in fact, we've become so, we know that somebody who's sort of writes you a legal notice using language like that is impossible. This guy doesn't have this kind of vocabulary. Forget it. Okay. And the third thing is they've, especially in courts, even in the US, etc., the judgments and orders that have been, generated like that have been just simply set aside, saying that this is not the human mind. You've not applied your mind on situations like this. Just for the fun part of it, there's an app which says you can put the plaintiff, the defendant, and it'll even give you the result. So, that's how advanced they are.
This is a question for Jamshed. You talk about copyrights, and man has been copying nature for quite some time. It really belongs to nature, whether it's music, whether it's visual arts. So how far back will you go in provenance as to where these origins come from? I was really moved by what Junie talked about, that you have natural heritage that UNESCO is talking about. In many ways, the arts actually belongs to nature, many ways, and man has been doing what he needs to do, and now machines will do it. Now, why is man feeling so threatened? Because nature should have been very threatened to start with. We're not giving back to nature. So I want to understand your perspective of how far legally will you really go back? Like when you buy land, you say go back 65 years to find out who owned it. And whether AI is actually, I think I'm just wanting to know whether you're in the arts, whether data are coming out from AI on the provenance of this. When did it start? So if you had dating, it might help.
So, this is a great argument. For example, if there was a public interest litigation on this subject, we'll say, we want to hear this side. So typically what used to happen? What does an artist or a writer, I believe Beethoven and several of his symphonies, he just wrote it, pushed it in a drawer and forgot about it. And that is, if you, I don't know if you know, it's hilarious. In the old days, what used to happen is, for a copyright, you would pick it up and post it to yourself. Okay, so here you go.
I've done that with cassettes.
So that used to be the proof that you've actually sent it back to yourself. And that used to be accepted. Of course, now things have changed. But I think you're right. I think things which are natural and are available in nature, so that would therefore, perhaps not be copyrightable, and therefore, you're to that extent. But wherever you are creating something, that I'll give you, if you have the time, just one small example. I mean, we'd done something about a legal resource center. We wrote about it. And I actually said, let's see if it can be copyrighted. So we sent it to the office. They gave the diary number, fine. Even I forgot about it. Then I suddenly asked the trademark attorney, I said, what happened to that? So he says, well, I'll check. He went. They said, oh, we think we have actually, the original file is missing. So file under the Right to Information Act. So we filed. Answer came saying file is missing. I said, fantastic. Till they find the file, copyright is mine. You can do whatever you want. So, it's very interesting, the lacunae in the process can actually give you the right to do certain things or not. Again, also, it's very interesting. Why I keep saying this is that wherever possible, please do send things, to the Copyright Office. Get your diary number, because what happens is when they advertise it, it then becomes against the world or in rem, vis-a-vis just between the parties. So you have some document, and I'm saying today, civil and criminal liabilities arise if you have proof. No, if you don't have the proof, then you have to first prove that you have the owner of the intellectual property. So to generally, I know it is, as a somebody in a village, etc., might find it difficult, but I mean, communities can actually help a lot. Just as you had copyright societies for music who were doing the same thing. Maybe the time has come for that.
My question is to any of the panelists, but really to Ruchira, to see whether the report has incorporated this. In education, we are always told AI is the next thing. My question is, when we know the computational power, what is the cost of AI? Does that come back to the student? Does that come back to the parent? Does that come back to the institution? One. And in terms of energy conservation, these are the two, from an education standpoint, has been not bothering me, but it's a pertinent question in my head.
Yeah, thank you. They are very good, important concerns, I think, but our report is really looking at how it's been used. But I think when we come to policy framing conversations, then we have to look at environmental impact and cost, really. I think accessibility is fine to say if we, where we do want to make sure that everyone has access to it, but if there's a cost to it, we've automatically, put a barrier. So I think those are conversations that are perhaps outside of our report's purview, but thank you for placing them.
There was some talk of geotagging earlier in one of the previous panels. And, you made a point, Trishla, that unless something is in the stack, there's really no way AI can do anything about it. So really my question is then, when I'm working with artists who are steeped in oral tradition, right? Okay, they are geotagged, great, but do we record them? Do we put them out there? What will happen to their music? I work with artists who are terrified of having their music recorded, right? And there are other artists who don't care what happens to the music, they just want it out there because they want a reel to their music to be seen or made by people, right? So one, of course, is to work with the artists to inform them, to make it better. And, I was asked by IPRS to do a workshop with my artists, and I was very keen, but I kept thinking in the back of my mind, what about the AI? It's one thing to get it copywritten, but what does AI do to it, right? And I'm looking at the worst case scenario. But my real question is, when you're working with oral traditions, we were talking about provenance just now. It was such an incredible question. What is the provenance for oral tradition? We already have in India folk artists artists who've emerged from the folk tradition, who are taking old songs, changing a few words, and passing it off as their own. And there are others who are making sure that the folk artists can't sing it, right? I don't know if you know that there's Pallo Latke, of course, it's very old. It's a Rajasthani folk song. Mane Aave Hichki, there was a reference to Hichki that Aditi did earlier, right? It's an old folk song. But why even this song, which is very popular right now, Lal Pili Akhiyan? It's a Rajasthani folk song. There's no ownership issue. And then the song Nimbuda Nimbuda was credited to Ismail Darbar, you know. So, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but the challenge I face, and for me it's a question that seems like a very erudite and you know, important. You guys have been saying so comprehensible, which is why I'm asking the question here. How does one proceed? And you're not talking about one artist, you're talking about working with 2,000. You know, I work with a village where 400 families are artists. The challenge is not so much about AI on one hand. The challenge is, what about the next generation? Is AI imperative? Is notating all those things that have come down to protect it? I mean, what does one do? So it's a big question, but yeah, Jamshed or Trishla, somebody.
Of course, I will stick strictly to the legal part. And when you want something to come within the four corners of the law, you have to follow certain rules, regulations, guidelines, etc. I mean, you know, you're trying to get this entire set of people. I mean, just because they don't want to sort of get their voices recorded doesn't mean that they're not the first owner of the copyright. Full stop. So yes, they are even, so that is one, that's fundamental. And I think that is something that perhaps in their, you know, you need to explain to them that, you know, ye karne se aapka fayda hai. It's not something that's not number one. So how do you, in the old days, first, you know, you had the, I mean, down the ages, I mean, right down to vinyl, to cassettes, to whatever you have today. So how are you going to, on what medium are you going to keep that heritage going? Or is it just an oral heritage? That's the one. The interesting thing is the exception to the Copyrights Act, where, for example, for the purposes of, I mean, say we're talking today, okay, and it's being recorded, I can say, if it were international, let's say first, please sign, you know, that you are giving me permission to record it. Over here, I'm saying it's fine because it is for educational purposes. So there is an exception to the rule. I know that something that was recorded for a particular, channel, the copyright remained with an NGO and not with the studio because it was for educational purposes. So these are sort of bright spots in this in the law today. But most definitely, I think this is something as what you have raised, what this gentleman about for nature, etc. This is all what we need to bring in, debate, discuss, and then put it out. And by all means, policy guidelines can remain in force. Even international, best practices can be brought in till you have legislation on the subject. That is how it is.
So I will compare this to a farming analogy where there was a patent on neem trying to be given. And the history of neem and the growth, the seed and the seed saving of it wasn't recorded. And goes back to the colonial times where they attempted to archive our heritage, both the colonizations, as I like to say, and then can we archive our own? And that may not always be audio recordings. Can you at least have the names recorded, their lifetime, the span of their lives recorded, the instruments they played, and then field recordings. It may not be studio formal recordings when they perform field recordings, because those are now becoming data points of citizen-led movements, and a lot of these NGOs are now using that as a starting point, similar to websites being like, I bought the URL. I didn't do anything with the URL, but I bought the URL. So I think just having those field recordings, that becomes a witness point in a sense. And a lot of seeds seeds are going through that. So I would just recommend you have 18 varieties, 85 varieties of a variant of rice from this area. So you can't patent each one of them, but just bring it on file. And I think that's what Jim said. Just how do you bring it on file in the easiest way? Because it does have a monetary cost to it. And yes, we won the Neem case.
It's a very short one. Could each of the panelists, this has been a fascinating discussion, by the way, and it's a really, really important discussion, I think, that everybody is going to be talking about an awful lot more in the future. But could you say one major misconception about AI and using it that you've come across that you think is damaging to the idea of it, and one massively positive thing about it as well? What's a really useful thing about it going forward in creative industries?
Oh dear, so that was a short question, but it'll be a long answer. I think one of the fears that people have are similar to what Divya said. You know, people feel that contributing to the data set in the AI is going to actually take over. You know, they will not have any autonomy, and they will not get, their sort of art will get used by others without them getting credit or monetary remuneration. I think that is, which is probably not completely, I mean, there are ways in which that information might be used, which could be fair, and they might actually benefit from it as well, but it could also be, we also know of cases where it gets exploited, that sort of information. So that's a fear that I see. And the good thing, I think, is just like Ashok was saying, I think being able to use it to do the menial stuff and to get, through processes very quickly. I use it sometimes to do summaries, and I don't necessarily go by it, but it's a very quick read for me before I decide how much more time to spend on it. So, yeah.
I think as far as the legal space is concerned, I mean, there's as long as you are the master and AI is the the usage, I think you're absolutely fine. There's no problem at all. There's tremendous use for things like that. I think it has quickened up, all sorts of processes which should have otherwise taken. I mean, for example, from in a situation like India, I mean, from the lowest court to the Supreme Court, it used to take years. Today, you can transfer it in 1 minute. I mean, I think that's the amazing part about AI. And yeah, and what is the scary part? I mean, again, it's a phobia, is what I said about where in a metaverse you suddenly become a little, icon, and you're moving around in that space. So, from sitting on a high chair, suddenly the judge becomes a tiny tot. I think that they have, these are all apprehensions. But I mean, it's good that it's recorded. One day, one day, if that actually happens, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Thank you. Well, in the music space, when we create music, what we often teach is when you have the inception of an idea to the execution of that idea. I teach speed. I think it's really important to get to the end as quickly as possible. But to get to the end, you need to know all the different stages. But because if you delay too long, then you just meander and go all over the place. I think one of the best things about AI is to help get that speed in the completion of an artistic idea. So right now I feel that's the most effective use of it. The most dangerous part about it is that if you don't know those different steps, by the way, but you just know that first one, and then you jumped over there, you're just creating a bunch of average, inadequate, generic, moronic musicians, So to me, that is my fear. If AI is just going to say that any 6-year-old says that, oh, I'm a Mozart because I can now put in 2 notes and I get a symphony. So then the whole world, it's a nice thing for everyone to try and think that they are creative, which everyone is, by the way, first of all, don't get me wrong. Everyone's absolutely creative. So like I said, it's a superb thing as a step in the door. But if people start making money out of it from that way, I think it's ridiculous. So you have to be careful about that and not fool yourself. Not fool yourself. Always know where you are in that stuff. But super accelerant.
I think the misconception is it is a phase. It's not going anywhere. And I think the sooner we learn to accept it, and I agree with the stupidity, I think the first phase is always be stupid. Play with it. Have fun with it. Because it's at a phase where you can also do that. And I'll stick to the misconception for now. Would you like to add anything, Sai?
Yeah, I think for me, the misconception is a lot of people think this is as powerful as AI can get. But I really think we are at such an early stage of where this technology will go. And that's also where my fear for AI comes from, of how far can this technology actually go, right? So when I asked the questions at the start, there might have been 2 people who said, oh, I have an AI friend. My fear is when everyone has only AI friends, which I don't think is so unreasonable. And to me, that's the scary potential of how it can, as it evolves and gets more refined, replicate and start replacing actual human interaction. That's my fear.
But try it. It's called Replica. It'll make a replica of you. It's a psychology tool and it reads back to you. It's crazy, but also interesting because we forget. Our memory forgets, but that thing remembers.
Yeah.
But you're counseling yourself. It's weird.
And the AI knows what you want to hear, right? Because you fed it that data, your insecurity is what makes you feel. So yeah, it's like a weird loop that can go down. But
I think in about 2 years, we're going to be in another space, which is where AGI comes in. That's a whole different conversation. When we have actual sentience. But that's a philosophical debate.
I think we're done. Thank you, everyone.